hearts of freedom's vanguard.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday evening edition of Freedom Link Radio. Good Lord, I don't even know what day it is. This 7th of February, 2012. Tonight, our guest is Bev Harris of blackboxvoting.org. And let me give you a little background on Black Box Voting. It's a national nonprofit, nonpartisan election watchdog group. Its mission is to restore citizens' ability to see and authenticate each step of our public elections. It's a very, very important thing that Ms. Harris is doing, and I'm so glad to have you on the show, Bev.
Well, it's nice to be here.
So, it's kind of fitting to have you here tonight when the votes from Colorado, from Missouri, and from Minnesota are being tallied right now. I guess my first question to you is, what is your thoughts on the electronic voting machines? Because that has been a question that I get repeatedly, and it's kind of hard to give an answer to. I mean, I know my answer, but I'd like to hear it from an expert. What's your thoughts on these electronic voting machines?
Well, the bottom line is they concealed actual counting of the vote from the public, and whoever controls the programming or the setup on the machine ultimately controls the election. So, it's about what you can see and what you can't see. So it's not about security of the system. It's about, can the public see it or not? And if you'll notice on some of the coverage that they've been doing on the caucuses, which are very open and in the public, the public can see exactly what's going on in most cases. And that is why we're starting to see that things didn't exactly check out. For example, in Iowa, it was not Romney who won Iowa. It was Santorum. That was because of an alert citizen who was watching the vote counting because it could be watched. And in Nevada, of course, they found that there were more votes than voters in 200 precincts out of 500 in Las Vegas, which is Clark County. So that was again found because people were able to see what was going on. So what happens with voting machines, whether they scan a paper ballot or whether they're all electronic, what happens is they take the vote counting process out of view of the public, and that's the key thing to remember. Now, there are ways that you can use a paper ballot scanning computer and return the process to the public. We can talk about that a little bit later. But the bottom line that you're looking for is, can the public see it or not? Because if we can't see it, basically someone else has control.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Now, one thing that I've said about these black box voting machines, these electronic voting machines, I should say, is the fact that they don't issue anything back to the person that's voting, meaning that, for example, if I go to an electronic voting machine and I make a vote, and in this case I'll say Ron Paul, boom. Now, you don't understand, or I don't understand as somebody who votes, what happens after that, only that it goes into the computer and the votes are tallied at some point in time down the line. But one way I thought that you can mitigate fraud is have these machines print out a paper receipt that could then be put into another box, and then you can bounce the paper tally against the electronic tally should there be any shenanigans. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it doesn't quite work that way, although you're right exactly when you say you don't know what happens after you voted into the machine. Nobody does, and that's the problem. And it doesn't matter how many times they test or certify or whatever. Ultimately, whoever controls that computer controls what it spits out. Now, in terms of printing a receipt, there are electronic voting machines that print, we call it the toilet paper roll. It's basically like a 20-foot-long cash register tape that disappears because it's on thermal ink, in a short amount of time. That hasn't really worked, and by the way, they don't really save it any place, and no one can ever really look at it. In fact, even what we need to be going for is, at the original count on election night, at the polling place before it goes anywhere. The public needs to be able to authenticate that count. And the problem with the receipt is the way that it comes out of the machine. It is so long and such small print, it takes a huge amount of time to actually count those up. So the ballot is a better idea than any kind of a receipt that comes out. But the problem with even the paper ballots going through the optical scan machines is that in most states there's absolutely no way for anybody to look at that ballot. And so you can't really compare what the ballots are ever with what the machine said. Now, there's an exception to that. And there's a really interesting pilot project that's been done in Humboldt County, California. What they've done, they have about 170,000 voters, and they have set it up so that after those ballots go through the voting machine and are scanned, they have a completely different scanner that they bought at like Office Depot, just like you and I would get a scanner. Mm-hmm. And they scan all the ballots through that and let the public have them on CD. They put them on the web. Anyone can count them. So that's the kind of thing where it's kind of the best of both worlds with technology where you can see both. Another place, there's a location in New Hampshire where they scan the ballots through the machine and then they right on the spot count them in public by hand. So, you know, when you have a hybrid system like that, there's another group in Illinois that said they went to their county clerk and said, tell you what, we just want to be able to videotape the face of each ballot. It only takes 20 minutes to deal out like a deck of cards, 1,000 ballots, which is the average size of a large precinct. So, you know, there's ways that you can allow the public at the precinct on election night to gather evidence and verify the count. And at least verify that what the machine says is right. They don't do that, and not only do they not do that, in many states they have made it illegal to look at the ballot at all. In Florida, they have said now, this is a newer law, that it is illegal to count the paper ballots even in a recount. And in New Hampshire, they have said, we've decided to remove ballots from Freedom of Information requests. Now, you recall in 2000 that the reporters went down to Florida and they looked at the ballots and, you know, did their own count a ways after the fact. Well, New Hampshire has said, we're not going to ever allow anybody to look at the ballots and count them. And remember, the ballots are anonymous. So this does not compromise, the secrecy of the vote.
Right.
But to say, we're using paper ballots so people can check them, if you don't let people check them, then what have you got? You have nothing other than, it's a pointless exercise. This happened recently in New York. There was a race that was separated by one vote. And the candidate said, okay, I would at least like to get a hand recount of these. And the state of New York so far has said no, they don't have any provision in the law that lets him actually look at the ballots. What they will do is a random audit of a small percentage. Well, that doesn't really get you anywhere. So the point being, and going back to my first point, the whole ball of wax is, can the public see it or not? And if they start withholding it from the public and saying, you know, you can't see, believe what our computer says, you have no other recourse. What that is a human rights violation, because the right, the human rights part has to do with the right to self-government. And you don't have self-government if you can't check and authenticate the choosing process.
No, absolutely right, Bev. Hold that thought. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Bev Harris, and Tim's going to chime in too. He's got a load of questions, so sit tight, stay tuned. We'll be back in 3 minutes. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Folks, don't forget to check out the new podcast over at theintelhub.com. Just posted a new one today. Can you believe that they're talking about how our Constitution just isn't what it used to be, and how the world now should use something else, that our Constitution is just outdated and antiquated and yada, yada, yada. Well, I address that on the podcast, so go to theintelhub.com for that. Our guest tonight is Bev Harris of blackboxvoting.org. And Tim, I know you've been chomping at the bit to ask her some questions, so by all means, hit it, man.
Well, first off, Bev, I'm absolutely just thrilled, as Joe is, tickled pink literally to have you on tonight, because you're just a great American hero, somebody that I admire a lot, and everything that you've been doing is something that we need in this country. So thanks a heck of a lot for everything that you do, Bev. And I would tell people that, there's only two people in this country that really do this kind of work, and that's Bev and Brad Friedman. And, it's too bad that we don't have more people doing, the yeoman's work that you guys do. And we often tell people, get involved. And I know this is something that happened to you a few years ago. You just, you had a normal everyday life, and that you suddenly became involved, and now here you are. Can you elaborate a little bit on that process, about what stirred you into this?
Yeah, and I think my story is the same as a lot of people who are unsung heroes out there, who are you see something and you get it, and you never don't see it again, And in my case, it's a different thing that I think stirs each person, where you suddenly see, oh my goodness, there's a problem here. What I saw was I was trying to find out who owned a voting machine company, and I found out that there was a Republican senator named Chuck Hagel from Nebraska who had owned and been the CEO of the voting machine company that counted his own votes in his first election. And not only that, but his election was cited as the biggest upset in the nation by the Washington Post. That's and right. I thought, now wait a minute. And then I found out he had not disclosed this. So it was never reported because he left it off his disclosure forms. And I stayed up all night that night. I just thought, why me? Here I am, just dinking around on my computer, but come on, this is obviously huge. And I guess I got bit by the bug down, and it's just never gone away, because the more questions I asked, the more wrong answers I got.
Yeah. And, for folks that don't know, there's a great documentary. HBO did a documentary with you, and I've watched it a number of times. And it moves me every time I watch it, Bev, and that's Hacking Democracy. And then there's another one on the web that is making the rounds. And I don't know, I think it was they probably just took part of that out of the Hacking Democracy video, but it's called Votergate, and you're very prominent in both of those. So, folks, if you want to see Bev in action, definitely check out Hacking Democracy and Votergate. But, everything that started here, Bev, came about, after that fiasco we had in 2000, where the Supreme Court decided our election, and then, we ended up with HAVA. To me, one of the worst acts that was ever passed in this country, aside from the Patriot Act, the Help America Vote Act, and it seems like that's the door that opened up this Pandora's box for us in the election process.
Yeah, they had actually been planning on a HAVA-like entity for a while, even before the 2000 election. Some of the records show, I looked back at some of the lobbyists, and they were signing on to lobby in something like that back in 1999, which is a little creepy. But basically, the Help America Vote Act, what it did was formalize and tell all the states that they needed to get these voting machines. Now, they didn't really need to, the way it was written, and the state of New York was the last holdout. They just refused to get rid of the lever machines. Now, remember, lever machines are a voting machine, but they're not software-driven, and they aren't as dangerous as these software-driven systems where some guy in Canada literally programs about a third of the United States. But what happened is they passed this law, the Help America Vote Act, and they allocated $4 billion and said, okay, everybody run out and get voting machines. And the states kind of felt pressured because they said, you have to do this right now or you're not going to ever get this money allocated to you. And then they set up this organization called the Election Assistance Commission, which was supposed to be sort of the counterpart to the FEC, to the Federal Election Commission, and the EAC was supposed to sort of oversee the disbursement of funds. Well, now And understand something, the EAC is 5 presidential appointees. How centralized is that? And then they started setting up their own technical guidelines committee, and they were going to set the specifications for what all the voting machines had to do. And they were, it was really going from a situation that was really a nice dispersal of power, which is what you want in a democracy. It's kind of messy, but it's very stable. And it went to 5 people appointed by whichever president is in power at the time, saying, this is what you need. Everybody go use this system that is programmed in this way. Very, very dangerous concept.
Yeah. And, and you make a good point, because I remember back at the time, all the states were pressured into joining into the electronic voting, which they twisted a lot of arms to get everybody to get that in play as quick as they could.
And took them to court. Now, when New York resisted, and they were taken to court and ultimately forced to abandon the lever machines and get the optical scan machines.
Yep. Which ought to tell you, folks, that there was an agenda at hand here. Somebody wanted, they wanted something more than just helping us out. I mean, when they put a name on it, like Help America Vote Act, for crying out loud, there's got to be something nefarious at work. I mean, kind of like, remember the old No Child Left Behind, and that turned out to be
exactly.
So,
every time you hear Help America Vote Act, think Help Yourself to America's Vote Act, because that's what it is. They were helping themselves to America's vote.
And now here we are. And now there have been a couple of big things that have happened in the last year. I don't know if folks have been paying attention. I know you've been paying attention, Bev. And one of them is folks have made a big stink about Diebold, which has now changed its name to Premier Election Services, as you know. But this year, or actually, no, I think it was a year ago, Diebold and ES&S, they merged together. But
right, ES&S being the largest system, Diebold being the second largest. And when they merged together, that gave one company 66% of America's vote to count. It's unbelievable. Now, Black Box Voting, my organization, we lodged a complaint with the Department of Justice on monopoly grounds, antitrust grounds. It was both a horizontal and a vertical monopoly. And the DOJ really dragged its feet and finally did this sort of bogus semi-splitting it up, where they gave all the existing accounts to ES&S and any new accounts to a company called Dominion out of Canada. Well, Dominion got all the New York voting machines when they got rid of the levers, and we don't even know who owns Dominion, by the way. For all we know, it's the same people who own ES&S. We don't know. It's private. And then ES&S has still basically control of 66% of the vote counting and will in 2012.
Wow. And the interesting thing about that is, where was the outrage in the media when ES&S and Diebold, merged together? One would think that a lot of people would have been, making a tremendous outcry over that, but nothing really happened in the media about that.
Yeah, they did cover it, but it was very, very toned down. And one of the things that I can't believe is there's no outrage about not knowing who owns either ES&S or Dominion. I mean, how bizarre is that?
Yep.
It's very bizarre indeed. And it just goes to show you the level of corruption and also the level of collusion that takes place, not just here, but I mean, just in corporate America as a whole. Folks, don't go away. When we come back, more with Bev Harris. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network. Looking for some great programming? Another show that Orion has to offer is Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye of FederalJack.com. You can catch his show every Wednesday and Friday evening from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. and again Sundays from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on Orion Talk Radio. We're joined by Bev Harris of BlackBoxVoting.org. And Tim, you were on a roll, man, so take it away.
Well, there's another, we were talking about ES&S and Diebold and the merger that happened a couple of years ago, and the fact that there was no outrage in the, our controlled American media. But there's another event that just happened this year, Bev, and that's the merger with Seidel and SOE in Barcelona, Spain, and the fact that this company bought into our election system, and now all of our, well, I shouldn't say all of them, but a greater portion of our electronic voting results are going to now make their way through Spain for some reason. Can you explain why that would be a good thing for American voting?
Well, I can't explain why it would be a good thing. I can't explain why it'd be a very bad thing to do. What happened is there was a company there is a company, SOE Software, out of Tampa, Florida. And by the way, when they report the results, they do them in a sort of nifty format. They're in a downloadable spreadsheet, and they're very detailed, precinct, every candidate, and so forth. That's all very fine and good, except that if you don't first, in public, at the precinct level, get those results committed, then you have no idea what this company is, whether what they're reporting is the real thing or it's something that they've tweaked. Now, what happened just a couple weeks ago is that SOE Software, which by now is reporting the results for 900 locations in 26 states, and in fact 14 states, they do all the results in the whole state. They were purchased by a company called Scytl, SCYTL, out of Barcelona, Spain, and they're currently merging their operations. Isn't that a nice little thing? And by the way, Scytl is a company, and their deal is to try to get everybody on internet voting, which sounds very easy and fun. The problem is whoever controls the server controls your vote totally. You cannot tell who voted. You can get a report, but that doesn't tell you who actually put the votes into the server. And they can tell you what the results are, but it's only what they say the results are. So you have a company that's pushing internet voting. They just got I believe a $9.2 million investment from a bunch of Goldman Sachs guys to push this into America and get it across America coast to coast, starting with the military vote. They bought SOE Software, which reports all the results, whether they come from internet or not. This is a very bad and monopolistic situation.
Yeah. And again, the fact that there is no outrage in the media, about this stuff going on, you just want to bang your head in the wall and say, for crying out loud, we're just giving away everything. Not only have we given our Constitution away after 9/11, now we're giving our the opportunity for we the people to elect our representatives. It seems like we've lost all of that now. But how about as far as the media goes, and they're being silent on this? Have you made any inroads there, Bev? Are you able to get a lot of airtime on, say, CNN or Fox, or do they try to ignore you?
More so in the past than now. I think it's getting to be very problematic for them to really start telling the truth about this stuff. I have, of course, the HBO special Hacking Democracy, that was aired 56 times on national TV. And I certainly do TV and quite a bit of media, but it's only a few outlets that will really report the whole story and what the context of it is. They may say, oh, electronic voting, the touch screens. The problem isn't electronic voting, the touch screens. The problem is counting votes inside a computer without any way for the public to authenticate. That's what they don't report. And it's interesting to see how, in a situation like Iowa or Nevada, when people are able to watch the count and identify discrepancies because they can see the discrepancies. The Associated Press, for example, instantly jumps on that and says, well, they just don't know what they're doing. Let's stop having caucuses. They need to use voting machines.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, they need to count the vote properly. And it's not that hard to do. It is done by hand in 1,000 locations in the United States still. And even if it's not done by hand, you have counties like Humboldt County, California, where they have a backup mechanism where they're scanning all the ballots and then scanning them on an Office Depot, sticking them on the web, letting people have them on CD. Do you know what happened the first time they did that? They published their ballots, their vote on the web in 2008. And the first time they did it, the public counted the votes and found out that the machines had miscounted them.
Gosh, you don't want that.
Yeah, and to their credit, Humboldt County's elections chief said, well, we're going to keep right on producing those CDs and putting these ballots out so everyone can check. And she dumped the Diebold system that had been counting her votes and had been caught miscounting them.
Well, we've had problems already this year. I think we touched on Iowa a little bit, but that's my old stomping grounds. And my aunt and my uncle, they're ward chairman and secretary down there. And I know that when they get done, they have to file a Form E, which is supposed to be the formal vote count, and then they send that in later on. And the state is supposed to check that to see if the vote really came true. But it doesn't seem like it made a rat's ass difference in Iowa so far.
Well, what happened in Iowa was actually a good thing, although it's not being reported that way. What happened in Iowa was the public was very alert this time, and they were noticing that in some locations, go figure, everything was out in public. They filled out a Form E, and then it was reported by the state Republican Party as a different number. For example, in Appanoose County, Iowa, a citizen named Edward True noticed that Romney had gotten 2 votes in his precinct, and it was reported by the state committee as 22 votes. And in Fayette County, there was a precinct where Romney got 4 votes, and it was reported as 54 votes by the state party. So the public stepped up to the plate and said, wait a minute, you guys are reporting the wrong thing. Well, at first, Edward True in particular, they tried to stop him. His county Republican guy said, you have no business looking at this stuff. And he said, yes, I do. Well, they had to admit that they had been miscounting. And as it turns out, over 2,000 votes were miscounted in 131 precincts where they either didn't submit their paperwork at all, or they submitted paperwork that had completely different numbers, or they submitted paperwork that wasn't signed at all, or was signed by someone in a completely different location. That was very interesting when there were a couple precincts like that where somebody signed it that wasn't even there. So, but the reason that this came to light is because it was in the public eye, and the public did see it, and basically forced this to come to light. Because what's going to happen if you restore the public ability to see and authenticate the essential steps is it's going to be like one big quality control program where at first all kinds of quality problems are going to come out. That's not a bad thing, because that's how you correct a quality problem. The sentiment is more, well, we need to cover up these problems because it's very embarrassing. Well, no, you know, it's going to be embarrassing when you have people watching very closely, but over time it will get better.
Yeah, and you know, I got to say, Bev, to your credit, a lot of what happened in Iowa is because of you, because people are aware of your website, and, you know, they've followed your work, and so people, you know, are trying to be a lot more cautious now. So again,
yes,
for what you've done.
And in Nevada, too, you know, one of the things we've been saying, and I sometimes think, I wonder if anyone listens. And I said, you know, you can't have more votes than voters. You can't have more votes than voters. Believe it or not, election officials will often say, oh, yes, you can have more votes than voters. Just a brief aside, in Memphis, Tennessee, I did an investigation in 2010, and I found 3,221 more votes than voters. The head of the Elections Commission said, well, there will always be more votes than voters. No, what that's called is stuffing the ballot box, for anybody who's unclear on that point. Well, so I've been saying, you know, guys, check and see how many people signed in to vote, compare it with the number of votes. Well, sure enough, in Nevada, in the caucus on Saturday, it didn't get reported until almost 24 hours because, lo and behold, all these precincts were coming in with more votes than voters. And that was coming to light, again, because the public was alert.
Wow. Well, again, kudos to you, Bev. And as I mentioned, Bev Harris, blackboxvoting.org, and then also Mr. Friedman with Brad Friedman with bradblog.com. Two of the places that you want to check out, folks, two websites to learn a lot more about elections. Coming up on the break here, we're talking with Bev Harris, and we'll be back
Flawless
in a bit.
Science believes you deserve the right.
Joined by Bev Harris of blackboxvoting.org. And I have to say, she really signifies the importance of citizen reporting getting out there, getting the information, getting it on camera, on your smartphone, take a picture, it doesn't matter what, but it just goes to show you just how important these things are. And I'll tell you, Bev and Tim, I mean, this kind of effort can't come at a more crucial time in the history of this country, because we really are at a precipice. And, you know, the American people have to make a decision whether or not they want to jump off or they want to save themselves and the country and right the ship. So go ahead, Tim.
Well, I wanted to ask Bev again, you know, with all the stuff going on that we're aware of in electronic voting, I mean, HAVA and electronic voting, this is literally an issue that has usurped our election process. And so there are a lot of people out there that are really ticked off and that are mad about this. But I wanted to ask you if is there anybody on Capitol Hill that, you know, has taken an interest in your work? I mean, either past or present that's in the House or the Senate right now, Bev?
Well, I have to say one person really stands out, and that's Dennis Kucinich. And let me tell you why. He did something a lot of people are not aware of. He did something very important. Back in 2003, when I discovered the Diebold software and I got a hold of about 30,000 internal emails in which the programmers were admitting they were breaking the law, I put those on my website, and I was immediately shut down by Diebold. And get this, their programmers are talking about all these illegal things they're doing. They didn't deny that those were their emails. They said, we have a copyright on those emails. And so they got me on a copyright violation. So they shut down my website, and I could not get my website back online because they invoked a pretty nasty set of laws called the DMCA. Well, what happened is, after I'd been down for 30 days, Dennis Kucinich's aide called, and she said, Bev, send us some of the most damaging of those emails. And I did. And he posted them on his congressional website and literally dared Diebold to come and get him and try to take his congressional website down. Diebold, by that time, because we'd been propagating these things, had a lot of college students were also posting them. They had issued cease and desist orders to 30 people and websites and shut me down. And when Dennis Kucinich put him on his congressional website, they backed down, withdrew everything. I got my website back. And, you know, that was an act of real courage. Now, he's being rewarded, I guess you can say, by they're trying to redistrict him out of office at this point.
Oh, no, they're not trying to redistrict him. They're just getting rid of his district.
Well, he's actually got to run against Marcy Kaptur now, and so it's going to be very competitive. Now, that actually started to be percolating when he asked in New Hampshire in 2008 in the presidential primary. There were some very odd results in that the hand count areas in New Hampshire had an opposite result of the machine count areas, and the machine count areas were all programmed by this guy named Kenny Hodjar, who's a convicted narcotics trafficker out of Massachusetts. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. It was bizarre. So Dennis Kucinich stepped in and said, you know, I was a candidate on the ballot. I want a hand recount. And he went in and paid for it. And right about then they said, you know, we may redistrict you out.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I think we are seeing people of courage, and we are seeing what happens to people of courage when they question this.
Yeah, I'm a big Dennis Kucinich fan. I worked on his 2008 media team, so and I know exactly what they did to him from being on the inside, and I know what they did to Ron Paul. So, you know, again, you know, nice to see Dennis step in on that one. I wanted to ask you another question about, we talked a little bit about, you know, people videotaping and how important that was to get the vote, but it seems like a lot of precincts, they make a big stink. You know, if you come up with a video camera, they'll try to drive you out of there and say, oh, no, that's not allowed in here. You know, and we the people should have the right to videotape our election process if we want to. So I wanted to ask you, what legal authority do precincts actually cite when they try to forbid video cameras, and what can people expect if they want to videotape?
Well, remember, we're talking about after the polls close. There's a big difference between trying to videotape before the polls close, which could compromise people's secrecy of their ballot, and after the polls close. The minute the polls close, it is public. You can videotape on a public setting. period. There is, and it comes under public open meeting law. They have no justification. Now, not having any legal justification hasn't stopped some states. Texas has tried to tell people it's a felony for them to videotape the vote counting when the polls close. I mean, when you do that, I have to call those kinds of laws corruption protection laws, because they serve no purpose other than to protect corruption. But it is in almost every state. It is completely legal as long as you wait until the polls close, and you can videotape everything. And you should. That's why those cell phones are so important, because you never, even I, as much as I've done and as much as I've seen, I never expect to see it happen when I'm there. And it happens. It's absolutely amazing. The associate director of Black Box Voting in 2004 was in Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland in Ohio. And, I mean, she didn't expect this. She's videotaping them, and she said, how come when you're doing this little 3% recount, the ballots are coming out and they're already pre-sorted? And they said, well, and she said, aren't they supposed to be randomly selected? And they said, well, our random is our random. We pick the precincts. We're going to count and we sort them out. Well, because of that, 2 people were sentenced to go to prison. I mean, only because it happened to be captured on video. So things really do happen, but you got to get the goods. You can't just say, well, I wrote down the number, and on my note paper it says this, and that's what I saw, I promise. You know, that doesn't do it. You've got to actually take a picture of something or get some sort of physical evidence.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of, what was it, Susan Berniger in New Orleans?
Right, right. Amazing footage she got. Wasn't that something? And that you can tell the...
Yeah, no, that was just absolutely astounding, where she actually went up to the voting machine and would press her name, and the guy she was running against kept coming up in the window down below.
Right.
And so what Bev says, folks, is critical. You know, if you can take those cell phone cameras with you, and when it is legal, I'm glad that you pointed that out, Bev. So, folks, try to help out as much as you can, and that's exactly what happened in Iowa this year. You know, people that have been listening to Bev and that have been getting educated now know their rights when they go in there, and don't let these people push you around, because we have rights. We, the people, you know, we have the right to be there, to be a part of the process. But as far as, okay, the election's going on now, do you have people involved in these elections that you're going to be talking with tonight or after the elections tomorrow?
Well, I don't organize. That's something I found out I'm not good at. I'm a good investigative reporter and I'm a good catalyst, but I don't organize people. However, what I do is focus on the communication sides of things and invite people, and I am a tip magnet, I guess you'd say, where I get people calling me from all over with all kinds of tips that I can follow up on. And I also encourage them not just to count on me. My advice, whenever you see something that you know is wrong, is to propagate it to 5 to 7 different places that are completely unrelated from each other. You know, your grandmother, the news, the Attorney General, Black Box Voting, Brad Friedman. I mean, just get it out there, because everybody's busy. But that's how things bubble up and hit the blogosphere. And as we know now, once they get through the blogosphere, they start to percolate into the mainstream media to the extent that's allowed.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not enough at this point, because so much has been brought forth. And again, you've done such an excellent job at that. Brad Friedman's done a great job at that. And I'll remind people again, blackboxvoting.org and thebradblog.com, I think it is. Folks, check those out, you know, if you want to get great information that Bev has given us here tonight. Is there anything in the last few minutes that you can tell us, Bev, that, you know, that you might encourage people to do other than videotaping or things that they can help to turn this around? Is there any way to get away from HAVA for us?
Well, if people are in New Hampshire and they're listening, then I would love to have them email me or get on my Facebook group. It's just called Black Box Voting, because we've got a specific action that's taking place next week in New Hampshire to try to take back the right. But you know, essentially, if you the first thing you got to do is keep your eye on the ball. You have a right to see. And there's 4 things you have a right to see and ask. Those 4 things are, number 1, who can vote, which is the voter list. Number 2, who did vote. And number 3 is chain of custody. Number 4 is the counting itself. Those 4 things you have an absolute right to see. And I want to remind people, Germany in 2009 banned computerized vote counting on the grounds that it's a human rights violation because, specifically, they said every essential component of the election must be something the public can see and authenticate without need for special expertise. Blam! Voting machines are gone.
Wow. Well, that is my dream. That is something that we all should hope for someday in this country, so that we can actually take our vote back. And you know, we talked earlier about a paper trail. Being a computer geek, it is all too easy to include a paper trail. You know, why they make that difficult for us, to me, makes it transparent that they just don't want us to see.
Oh, yes. And then in the places where you do get that paper record, then they circumvent it by saying, oh, now we're going to make it against the law. And the argument they use is so bogus. They say it's against the law because it compromises the secrecy of the vote. Well, it doesn't. It's anonymous.
Wow. Well, there's the music. It looks like we're up against the hour here, Bev. Just an absolute thrill to have you on. You're a true American hero. Watts? Timmy, thank you, sir. And don't forget, folks, check out Against the Wall with James Freeland, otherwise known as JJ, Tuesday and Thursday mornings from 8 to 10 Eastern and Sunday from 3 to 5 right here on Orion Talk Radio. And, Joe, I just got to say, I got goosebumps from, you know, talking to Bev Harris, because she is truly, you know, an American hero for me. I idolize that woman, because we often tell people all the time, you know, it's about you people out in the audience. All we can do is give you the information, but you have to get active. You actually have to do something to help the process, because we're just a couple of people here, you know, all of us on the network. It's you that has to react and has to do something. And Bev is one of these people who's done it. So thanks to Bev Harris for coming on. I mean, we easily could have done 2 hours with her. And I will remind people, if you want to see more on Bev Harris, there's 2 great video documentaries you can look for on my site on the AmericanTruthNetwork.com in the movies section, or you'll be able to find her on Google Video, and that's Hacking Democracy. That was an HBO documentary, again, Hacking Democracy, and also a short film called Votergate. And reminder to folks to check out her website, blackboxvoting.org. Get yourself educated there, and then also check out Brad Friedman's website, thebradblog.com. And Joe, you know, as I was saying, if we ever, you know, are able to take this country back, they will probably write a chapter about Bev Harris and you know, what she's done to help us in this fight.
I sure hope so, because she certainly does deserve it. And, you know, there's a lot of people like her in different facets of our society today that are actually trying like hell to turn things around. And it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of personal sacrifice. I mean, you have to remember something, folks, that this country was founded on sacrifice and blood. I mean, the founding fathers didn't say, well, you know, can't do this. This isn't a profitable endeavor. No, they didn't say that. They look at James Madison, died broke. Look at Thomas Jefferson, died broke. These people gave their fortunes away, everything. They sacrificed everything to ensure that we would have freedom. And over the course of time, we have pissed and spit all over their sacrifice, and it just absolutely makes me sick. And one of the things that I want to talk about tonight, speaking of that, is this New York Times piece that came out. We the People loses appeal with people around the world. Just listen to that for a second. Say that to yourselves. We the People loses appeal with people around the world. Are you sick? I mean, this guy, Adam Liptak, that wrote this, I mean, he's delusional. Absolutely freaking delusional. We the People loses appeal? What? And secondly, who gives a crap what other people around the world think of our Constitution? I mean, this has got me so freaking sick. I did a podcast today on this very subject at theintelhub.com. You should go check it out. I probably won't be as boisterous, I guess you could say, as I was on that podcast. But, I mean, folks, if this doesn't enrage you, I don't know what will. If this doesn't get your blood boiling, I don't know what will. So I'm going to dissect it a little bit for you. And I'm going to have Tim chime in, of course, because he's the voice of, he calms me, you know. He's like the calming effect.
Timmy.
And so, see, you did it already. Can't help it. So this article starts off, the Constitution has seen better days. Yeah, really. Sure, it is the nation's founding document and sacred text. And it is the oldest written national constitution still in force anywhere in the world. But its influence is waning. Stop. Why is the influence waning? You know why the influence is waning, folks? Because we, the people, are not enforcing it. You know, I always hearken back to that, my favorite video on YouTube, the tiny dot. Okay? There's 545 of these criminals, 545, 535, one of the two, 35, yeah, of these criminals in D.C. And they hold, they have control, I guess you could say, over the Army, the armed forces, and you got the IRS and things like that. But it ends up being a very small minority of people. And then we have the American people, which are over 300 million strong. And I'm sorry, folks, if you don't understand the power that you, the individual, hold, then you need to find it. But anybody needs help, I'll help you find the way. Because people like Adam Liptak need to be set straight, if you know what I mean.
Well, you know, when I hear crap like that, Joe, you know, when they say stuff about like the Constitution is waning, I mean, that's just absolute crap. I mean, the first thing I think is that's a hit piece. You know, someone's trying to implant disinformation in people's brains into thinking, oh, yeah, you know, maybe I guess we have had that thing around a couple hundred years. You know, maybe it's time to move on. You know what, folks? The Constitution, what that is, it's a threat to the powers that be. That's why they're chipping away at it, because they know that it prevents them from doing what they want. I mean, if we didn't have the Constitution, for crying out loud, we wouldn't be living in the country we live in today. We'd all be behind razor wire.
Well, I'll tell you what, therein lies a misconception too, Tim, is that are we really free? You know, are we truly free?
That's a good point.
You know, look at Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto, and then look at the 10 planks that he has in there to a communist society, and you'll find that all 10 planks are firmly rooted in American society. So that's the thing that people have to understand. The one thing that this country was founded on, there's three things: liberty, freedom, and personal responsibility. And unfortunately, people don't know what it means to be free. People don't know what liberty's all about. And people these days certainly don't understand personal responsibility, cause and effect. If I do something, you know, if I do something, Tim, there's going to be an effect. If I do something good, I may benefit from it. If I do something bad, there may be consequences. But the fact of the matter is that you take it and you move on, you know? And that's the thing that people don't grasp and understand anymore, due to the fact that we've had this shift away from people being responsible for their own actions to take care of themselves, to a shift of, don't worry, the government has your best interest in mind, and we will do what's right for you. We'll fight for you. We'll take care of you. Don't worry about a thing. We have your best interest at heart. And so people have been lulled into this false sense of security because the government is there to protect you. And in certain aspects in the Constitution, the government is there to protect us. But only a very small and limited means are they supposed to do that. Certainly not the intrusion that we see today. So, folks, when we come back, I'm going to make you pretty much sick until you vomit. Wait till you hear some of the things that this guy has to say. It'll truly make you sick. We'll be back in 3 minutes' time. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio on the Orion Talk Radio Network at AM 1650.
I got my pew.
Welcome back, folks. Should anybody want to get in contact with myself or Tim, you can contact us at the Freedom Link at CenturyLink.net. That's the Freedom Link at CenturyLink.net. The subject of the second hour is this freaking hit piece article on the Constitution. We the people lose appeal with people around the world. New York Times. And it gets into this. It says in 1987, on the Constitution's bicentennial, Time magazine calculated that of the 170 countries that exist today, more than 160 have written charters modeled directly or indirectly on the U.S. version. A quarter century later, the picture looks very different. The U.S. Constitution appears to be losing its appeal as a model for constitutional drafters elsewhere. Yeah, because there's a real frickin' budding industry, constitutional drafters. According to a new study by David S. Law of Washington University in St. Louis and Mila Vierstag of University of Virginia. The study, to be published in June in the New York University Law Review, bristles with data. Its authors coded and analyzed the provisions of 729 constitutions adopted by 188 countries from 1946 to 2006, and they considered 237 variables regarding various rights and ways to enforce them. Among the world's democracies, Professor Law and Verstag concluded, constitutional similarities to the United States have clearly gone into freefall. Over the 1960s and 70s, democratic constitutions as a whole became more similar to the U.S. Constitution, only to reverse course in the 1980s and 90s. Stop there. Why the hell do we care that people are modeling their constitutions on our Constitution? At this point in time, I don't really think it matters. I think it's a moot point. Don't you think, Tim?
Absolutely. You know, and the fact that they're reversing course, well, why? It's certainly not the people that are saying, you know what, we've got just a little too much freedom. I think we should go back to a fascist state. I think we should go back to, corporatism and having the rich people rule over us. What a lame, I feel my blood pressure going up.
You got to remember, too, though, Tim, that there's actually an increase in the amount of despots that are ruling the world, too. And, of course, they don't want something modeled after our Constitution. I mean, that would defeat the purpose of despotism. So you can't have despotism and have a constitution like ours. No, 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 no. So it goes on. And it says, the turn of the 21st century, however, saw the beginning of a steep plunge that continues through the most recent years for which we have data, to the point that the constitutions of the world, democracies, are, on average, less similar to the U.S. Constitution now than they were at the end of World War II. Oh, and here we go. This is my favorite part. From here on forward, it says, there are lots of possible reasons. The United States Constitution is terse and old, and it guarantees relatively few rights. Stop there. Let me tell you something, folks. Regardless of who you believe in, our rights don't come from a piece of paper, and they don't come from a government. If that was the case, they would be privileges granted to us by something. These rights come from our Creator, and only the Creator can take them away, or you can give them away. And that's the thing. That's what you have to understand. Constitutional rights in and of itself is kind of an oxymoron, because the Constitution doesn't grant rights. The Constitution's a reminder of what rights are. And it also limits the government's ability to abuse them. If you are aware of them, then you know what they are, and it takes away the government's ability to abuse them.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and they make it seem, Joe, like when our forefathers came up with this idea of a constitution, and this was just one of those haphazard things. Not true. I mean, they looked at a lot of democracies, before they wrote our Constitution. There was a lot of forethought that went into that. So, how some asshat can say that our rights are getting old? Oh my gosh!
But it gets better. It gets better, Tim. It says, here we go. The commitment of some members of the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution according to its original meaning in the 18th century may send a signal that it is of little current use to, say, a new African nation, and the Constitution's waning influence may be part of a general decline in American power and prestige. Who cares what an African nation thinks about it, first? And second, what the hell is the United States Supreme Court doing trying to interpret what the Founding Fathers' intentions were when they wrote it? I could tell you very simply what their intentions were.
It seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, when you read it, it means what it says. So let's go through it. Freedom of speech, freedom to peaceably assemble, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. I think that says it all. If you want to shout from the mountaintops, if you want to hold a sign and march down the street, if you want to do anything speech related, you have the freedom to do so. There should be no censorship whatsoever. The right to bear arms is fairly cut and dry, especially the last sentence, and this right shall not be infringed. How the hell else do you interpret that, Chicago?
Yeah, and that's another thing, Joe, that they put a lot of forethought into, because they saw how other countries and other democracies were overrun back, in history before them. So they gave us that provision so that we could hang on to the democracy or the republic that they were about to give us. A lot of forethought went into that.
Absolutely right. In an interview, Professor Law identified a central reason for the trend: the availability of newer, sexier, and more powerful operating systems in the constitutional marketplace. Quote, "Nobody wants to copy Windows 3.1, he said. I mean, this guy's a real frickin' asshat.
Holy
Nobody
cow.
wants to copy 3.1. Get the hell out of here." In a television interview during a visit to Egypt last week, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the Supreme Court seemed to agree. "I would not look to the United States Constitution if I were drafting a constitution in the year 2012. Well, then get the hell off the bench. What the hell do you think you're doing? You took an oath to support and defend it, and you're trashing it?
Isn't that amazing?
I mean, that's treasonous.
And don't forget this from a woman who sits on the Council on Foreign Relations. So that ought to tell you a lot right there.
Oh, my God, it makes me absolutely sick. Absolutely sick. The rights guaranteed by the American Constitution are parsimonious by international standards, and they are frozen in amber, as Sanford Levinson wrote in 2006 in our undemocratic Constitution. You know why it's undemocratic? It's undemocratic because we don't live in a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. But it's one of those things that people think, democracy is not freedom. It's mob rule. And there's a reason why the Founding Fathers made it a constitutional republic. It's so that the minority has equal representation.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we find ourselves in more and more these days. Folks, when we come back, Mrs. Joe Joseph is going to join the broadcast. So watch out. It's going to get hot in here. You're listening to Freedom Link Radio. Don't go away, folks. 3 minutes, not a long time to wait. Well, we've done it now, folks. By talking about all this stuff and getting all fired up, I have managed to piss my wife off. And so, with that said,
It's not like you've ever done that before, Joe.
Yeah, I know. I'm pretty good at that, actually. But with that said, I'm going to bring her on the broadcast now, Timmy. So buckle in.
Okay.
Hi, Ange.
Hi, Tim. Hi, everybody. All right. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Joe was saying before the break. I think a lot of people get confused when we're talking about rights, constitutional rights. We don't have constitutional rights. We have natural rights, and the Constitution is there to protect us from having our natural rights infringed by the government. That's what we have. We have natural rights, not constitutional rights. That's a misnomer. So when they start talking about the Constitution is insufficient and people think it's outdated and we need something, the Constitution doesn't guarantee us enough rights. No, that's a complete lie. The Constitution says that because we have natural rights and there's no one human being with authority over another, our rights are unlimited unless we're just not allowed to infringe on the rights of other people in the process of, pursuing liberty and happiness. But we don't have limits on our rights. We do have responsibilities with rights, but not limits. So what do you think about that, Tim?
Oh, I would agree with you 100%, Angie. It's like somebody has a vested interest in trying to take all of this away from us. Which is quite clear when I see, people try to say that it's an outdated document and, that all of this stuff is, they try to infer that it wasn't, very clearly thought out and that for some reason there's something about life today that negates all of the things that our forefathers, put a lot of forethought into. And again, all I can say is to me, it's disinformation and propaganda. Somebody is trying to get this seed planted into people's heads that we need to change. And, I don't know if this is the kind of change, they were talking about in the 2008 election. I am not down with it.
Right. And what begins to happen is that when they start talking about wanting to spell out specific rights, that's what they do in socialist societies. They do that because they want people to understand that they have this many rights. They're allowed to do these kinds of things, and the rest outside of what's delineated is not considered inherent to free people. And that's because they're more interested in the, quote, good of the whole than the individual. And the Constitution that we have is designed to protect sovereign individuals from intrusions and, everything, miscarriage of justice. That's why we have a right to be heard in court. And then we see that they're also trying to do away with that. So it's a concern. It's certainly a concern. It's something that people should be talking about and, making sure that you're talking about this with your neighbors and your family members. It's a discussion that needs to be had right now, especially since every time we turn around, there's another attack coming on the Constitution and, the rights of the people in this country.
Yeah, and that's where that, part comes in about personal responsibility that Joe mentioned. There's just so many people that don't accept that, upon themselves. They think there's somebody else out there to do it for them. And I'm sorry, folks, there's not. We need everybody en masse, to stand up and start screaming. I mean, Angie, you bring up a lot of valid points, and we had a lot of this discussion the other night after Sunday night show. I mean, we had a very spirited discussion because I know you and I, and Joe as well, are very frustrated about what's going on in the country right now. Not just as American citizens, that think about the way things should be, but because, we've got children in the world. And, we do not want to pass this on to our kids. No. My favorite joke now is I want my kids to have the world that I thought I had. Things have to change. And it's not going to change, folks, until you sitting right there right now listening to this radio show, until you get involved. And if that sounds a bit daunting for you, Again, I point to Bev Harris. Here was a woman who was an ordinary housewife, and, you know, she was stirred to action. And because of that, look what Bev has done. You know, maybe you're going to be the next great American sitting out there. It could be you. All you have to do is go about it. Get up and do something.
I agree.
It's not going to happen if they sit there and think, well, somebody else is doing something. Joe Joseph is doing something. Angie Joseph is doing something. You know, Tim Watts is doing something. I don't have to. No, you know what? We need all of you. And again, you can't take this information for yourself. You folks are all awake out there. You have to now take this information. You are disciples. And that's the way you have to look at it. You have to go out into the world now, into the workplace, with your friends, your family, and you have to speak the truth to them. You have to let them know what's going on, and you have to question the dogma that's been ingrained in these people's brains and why they think wrong. Because if you don't, there is going to be no change, because these other poor fools are stuck watching mainstream, you know, media, and we already know that's half of the problem in this country. So,
right. And just in case people are, forget the severity of the situation that we find ourselves in right now. You know, in America, we are now facing a situation where the government and Congress overwhelmingly and the Senate overwhelmingly have said that for whatever reason they choose, if they say that you're suspected of anything that they think is belligerent action, I mean, we're talking about anything. We know what's been going on. Anything that they choose to say that makes you a suspicious individual in their eyes, that they can now come in the middle of the night, the military, the United States military, they can come in your house in the middle of the night, take you out of your bed, drag you away, and nobody will ever see or hear from you again. You don't have a right to an attorney. You don't have a right to a trial. You can be stripped of your citizenship, and nobody ever hears from you again or knows where you went. This is where we find ourselves in this country right now. I don't even have words to describe the danger, the peril that we are all in this country. This is worse than anything Hitler ever did, Stalin ever did. I mean, they could have only dreamed of that kind of power. I mean, this is something they lusted after. And we're in a situation as an international community, globally, we are in a situation where, and unfortunately, we are the trendsetter in the world. Whatever's going on in the United States is, you know, whatever license we're using to not obey the rule of law or to come up with excuses to disregard it, it seems that everybody else in the world follows suit. Well, the United States is doing it. We can do it. I mean, we just had Egypt and their new government. I use that term very loosely. We just had them name their new internal, Stasi police force Homeland Security, which I think is ironic. And the thing that people don't realize is that we are in as much peril as people were in back in some of the darkest ages in human history. We're not headed there. We're there. We're there. The reason why it looks different, everyone's waiting for something overtly horrific that they can see with their eyes and hear with their ears, like, what happened in Nazi Germany. They're thinking, well, when we start to see that, we know that for sure we're in trouble. We're going to have to do something about it. No, we're already there. We're beyond that point. The difference between the way things look now and the way things looked in other dark periods of human history is that they have found a way to neutralize the threat. The threat is, of course, the throngs of people that outnumber insane dictators that seek to gain any sort of money and power they can by any means necessary. Absolutely no regard for human rights or human life anywhere. I see that we're coming up on this break, right, Tim?
Yep. And Folks, you're listening to Freedom Link Radio with J2, Joe Joseph, and Tim Watts, and Joe's better half, Angie Joseph, is joining us here tonight. I want to remind you real quick that if you want great radio to listen to during the day, folks, while you're at work, make sure you check out The Edge with John Stokes. It's Monday through Friday, 1 to 3 Eastern. John Stokes always got something to say, always informative and always very insightful. So check out The Edge with John Stokes. And Angie, you spurred me to think about something that I've mentioned on here before, and that is the fact that, you know, we have what I like to call coming in this country is a Niemöller moment. And I say that because it refers to Reverend Niemöller and that famous quote from World War II. Where they said, you know, first they came for the socialists and I didn't say anything, you know, because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for the communists and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a communist. And then they came for the Jews and I didn't say anything because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for the Protestants and, oh, guess what? There was nobody left to speak up for me. And that's where we're headed, folks. It's what I call the Niemöller moment. And I promise you that as we're sitting here with everything that's going on, that's where we're headed. Unless you get active, unless you incite other people to get active. But I don't want to take up too much time because Angie's on a roll here. And, you know, actually, you're almost, I got to say, a little more toned down than the other night on Sunday night. Geez, folks, I had to look for flying glass and stuff like that. Don't get this woman angry because I got to tell you, there's a lot of passion behind Angie. So
it's the New Yorker in me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that Reverend Niemöller moment, that's a really poignant piece of history, and it's a chilling piece of history. It's not one that any of us want to have to come to grips with on our own in our lifetime. But unfortunately, that just seems to be where we're going. And what I was talking about before the break is why don't people realize that we are in another dark age right now? Why don't they realize it? Why, you know, do people just go about their lives like nothing's going on? They're not paying attention. Even those who you try to talk to, a lot of times they just don't care. They're too busy living their lives and paying their bills. You know, they just want to go home after work, you know, put their feet up, eat dinner, have a cup of coffee, and unwind. We all want to do that. We all want to do that. We are in a crisis that our children and our grandchildren are going to inherit. And however bad it is now, it's going to be so much worse by the time they have to deal with it. I shudder to think of how much worse things could get for our children. And that's why we do this. It's why we spend our time doing this. But things look different now, not because we're not in a dark age yet or because we're headed in that direction. We have a technocracy erected around the dark age that we're living in right now that has enabled, the people that are in power all over the world. You're not just here. Problem is not exclusive to the United States. So there's this technocratic structure that cloaks them effectively, if you will, from people being able to overtly determine that, you know, these people are as wicked as they are. I mean, I don't really know what other word to use. They're just wicked. So because we don't see, you know, massive killings and torturings and all that stuff that used to go on in the Dark Ages and through other dark ages in human history, you know, under the Nazi Germany regime and Pol Pot and all of this. The reason why it looks different now is because they've figured out that they can neutralize the threat, which is the numbers of people rising up to fight against them, while still not having to go through the expense. It's unbelievably expensive to commit genocide. You have to, you know, it's such an expensive endeavor to establish, you know, figuring out what to do with all the dead bodies. And I mean, it's just expensive. It's a burden on, you know, the people that are carrying out that kind of a crime.
Well, tell that to Zbigniew Brzezinski. Remember one of his famous quotes is he says it's easier to kill 1 million people, you know, than it is to, how did that go? Easier to kill 1 million people than it is to control them. So,
right.
But, you know, I think Angie. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say you make excellent points. And, you know, I would say that the torture and killings are going on, and we know that. It's just not happening under our nose right here. So folks, if you go over and you ask the folks in Libya what's just happened to them, or you go to Iraq, or you go to Afghanistan, you go to some of these other countries, they're living it right now. We're not here. To a greater degree. I mean, some people get hauled off that we don't know about, but, it is coming. Again, that Niemöller moment is coming. It is happening in other countries right now, and we're part of it. Our country, the United States, of America, our U.S. military. And so Angie's right. It's not happening here right now. And your point is well taken, Angie. People are just too comfortable. They come home from the end of the workday, and, they want to watch TV. They want to watch Dancing with the Stars. They want to watch, Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football. And there's a reason why we're the most overly entertained society in the world, so people aren't stirred to action. We're too caught up in our creature comforts, I think, for people to get active.
For a long time, they figured out that they could distract people and give them toys and burden them with bills and, cause life to be so chaotic and drive people towards such self-centeredness that they could still extract taxes from them while neutralizing them as a threat. The reason why we're literally teetering on the brink of just utter inhumanity is because what's happening is we're under a situation where the global financial economy is collapsing because all the wealth has been sucked out of all of the economies. I think Joe is going to be talking about a good example of that soon here coming up too. But so what they end up with is lots and lots and lots and lots of unemployed people who cannot pay more taxes. They're spent, they're tapped out and bled dry, and they're still mouths to feed. They're what they're what the elite refer to as useless eaters. And that's when you start seeing mass killings and active genocide. And so we're there. We are at that point, and we're right on the brink of going over the edge. And as we can see, nobody's making any efforts to pull this beast back so that we don't go over the financial cliff. But it's going to happen. We've not decreased spending. We've not done anything to control the completely and totally out of control government. And this is what happens when you don't have something like a gold standard or a silver standard to regulate how much money they can spend, because, at least then if it's not in the vault, if it's not in the bank, they can't spend it. Now, they just print up whatever money they want to spend and say that we're stuck paying for it. It's all illegitimate. Nobody should be recognizing this authority. We should do anything we can as a global community to stop things from getting any worse. I mean, it's going to get ugly. Yeah. And our kids are going to have to live through it.
And that's, you're right, Angie. And I'm spoken like a true mom and a true patriot, too, because we all talk about this. And I know, again, we had this spirited discourse, on Sunday night, but it does come back to those of us that have kids. And folks, if you don't, I mean, think about your families, your brothers and sisters. I mean, your nieces and nephews. And for those of you that do have kids, is this really the way that you want the world for your kids to have? Because if you think it's going to stay the same, it's not. It is only going to get worse. If you haven't recognized the downward spiral that we've taken since 2000, since 9/11, you're watching too much TV. Again, I just got to say, step away from the damn idiot box. Put the remote control down. I mean, how bad do you really want to watch TV? Angie, I didn't, this is the first year since I was 10 years old. I'm a huge sports fan. I did not watch one football game all year because that much is going on right now. I thought, there's no time. How can I allow myself the luxury to watch something so meaningless when something so meaningful is going on in our world right now?
I don't know, Tim. You tell me.
You've been smoking a few luckies.
A little hard on the luckies this week, but it's all good.
No, she had to split, but when all's said and done, this thing is going to come down crashing and burning. How it comes down, I don't know. I don't think you can say, Tim, because what I've come to find out is that everything that we believe we see it in our head, these events that we know are going to happen at some way down the line, and you envision them in your head to be a certain way, and it's never that way when it actually comes to pass. Bread lines, you know? Think about bread lines. You know, we're not in a depression yet. Well, hell, we have bread lines, you know? And now today, you don't see bread lines. Instead, they're replaced by EBT cards and food stamps.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I would make a point that the media shades us from a lot of that because, you know, bread lines might be one thing, but how about a mortgage crisis? How about people that have lost their homes? I mean, how many homes have been lost, Joe, the last few years? I mean, that's bigger than bread lines. If you don't have a home, folks, I mean, for crying out loud, if you don't have a roof over your head, I mean, there are things that are happening. We're just being insulated from these things by, you know, a media that is an accessory. They're an accomplice in this whole scheme of things.
Absolutely right, Tim. We're out of time tonight, folks. Let me give you a little update on what's going on here with Freedom Link Radio. On Thursday evening, our guest is going to be Michael Badnarik, 2004 Libertarian presidential candidate. We'll be taking calls and everything else. And on Sunday evening, Conspiracy Chronicles continues. And subject for that night is Ambassador Leo Wanta and the $27.5 trillion. Have a great night, folks.